A warm welcome to everyone back to the State of Affairs podcast. We are back again after a brief pause. Today, I am conducting this podcast sponsored by the Study Box Education Academy. Get your kids enrolled. It's within my district, so I would love to and vouch to actually promote that thing. It's a new thing and a new startup. I would love to see any kind of feedback from the people who will be joining this conversation after it's being pulled up on the YouTube. I'm joined by Miss Mitali Nikore. She doesn't need any introduction, and there's a reason for this because there's a long list to her credit. She has been doing immensely, and very significantly contributing to the research and to the other discourses also. But for the convenience of the audience, I would like to introduce her very shortly. She is an economist. Mostly her work is related to gender equality. She has been an advisor to Asian Development Bank, UN Women, World Bank also. She comes with lots of experience when it comes to gender equality. She was a keynote speaker at the Global Solutions Summit 2022, recently named as the LinkedIn top voices for the gender equality. Other than that, it's actually about her recently presented paper, Gender Budgeting in India Pre and Post COVID 19 Analysis. She has done her master's in economics and political science, in economics actually, from London School of Economics and Political Science. A very warm welcome and good evening, uh, Mitali, to this conversation.
Thanks, Mehraj. I'm very excited about it.
Uh, Cutting through all the introductions that I have seen, I have come across your profile on LinkedIn and also some other social media platforms, and also the Nikore Associates that has been forwarded by me by your organization. First of all, I'd like to delve into the paper that you presented. What actually transpired that you came up with this paper, Gender Budgeting in India Pre and Post COVID 19 Analysis?
So I think, Mehraj, it's been a very interesting time, in our life, hasn't it? COVID. It was a period, now that we have had a little bit of time to recover, I would say, from the trauma that COVID brought to all of us, I'm sure, in different ways. And I don't want to be insensitive to anyone. Of course, we have all survived, but people have lost, relatives, siblings, parents through this period. But now, when we look back at those 2 years, can you imagine that this one virus just shut everything down? You didn't see people in the streets, you didn't see people in anywhere. But for academics, it was also an exciting natural experiment because it was an exogenous shock. It was something that nobody could predict would happen, that your entire city, your entire world will shut down. But the biggest thing about COVID was that some people, and I think, given that you are not sitting in Delhi, so you are in a very lucky space, and you understand it much more than us because you see a lot of marginalized groups around you. The marginalized groups who were already doing badly before COVID again faced the worst brunt of COVID. And women, of course, they are not homogenous. There are women who are very privileged. But at the same time, when we look at public sector expenditure, right, government spending, that is intended for the poorest women, the women who are suffering, say, a shadow pandemic of domestic violence. I mean, I'm absolutely shaken by one of the recent cases of domestic violence that came up in the news and has been dominating the headlines for the last few days. And this is where the government spending on services for women becomes very important. That how do you can you create some domestic violence shelters, can you create care facilities for mothers, can you create healthcare facilities? All of this requires financing. So that's why tracking the gender budget becomes so crucial to gender equality in itself, because government is still, even today, the biggest source of finance for any sort of gender related, gender equality related services. So the motivation behind the paper was to look at the numbers, which Luckily, in the budget statements, they are very transparent and clear to all of us. And our team, took some time to build a data bank. And in that data bank, we've actually entered gender budget statement data from 2005, which is when it began. This entire exercise of gender budgeting. And based on that, we conducted the analysis to see the impact of COVID on the gender budget, and whether amount financing for women's services was actually being increased, not increased, what was happening with it.
That's a very fascinating thing you come up with. Actually, you have been, advising to the global institutions, be that Asian Development Bank, be that World Bank, and some other organization, and your entire organization has been dealing with with the data and the research regarding gender equality. Where do you think that there are some serious and radical policy interventions that are needed when it comes to gender equality, and then that will convert into the gender budgeting, and a discourse that surrounds it will actually come up to the surface and make much of the sense?
Yeah. So, I think at this point in time, we are at a very interesting state of influx and flux, right? When we speak to people in large cities, they will tell us, क्या जरूरत है मैडम, हमारे ऑफिस में देखिए आप कितनी औरतें आ गई हैं अब. It's a typical refrain. And you don't just hear this in tier one, you're hearing this in tier two, and I'm sure that somewhere around you also, you may start to see more and more women coming into the workforce. And that is being taken as a, symbol of gender equality and women's empowerment. But it is not. Just being able to work outside of your home as you want to is not even a basic human right. It's not even the 100%, because even today when women are working, they have to take permission from their family. They have to ensure that the job is appropriate for them. It's more, say, a knowledge work or services type of job. They can't work in the factories. They will never get permission from their homes. It's only so we are seeing a labor market today for women, which is very clustered at two extremes. So, on one extreme, you have women who are highly educated, working in very, advanced, high-paying jobs in urban areas, organized sector corporates. And then on the other hand, you have, completely labor type of jobs, which are highly labor intensive, traditional kind of work, agricultural wage labor, textile sector, completely labor intensive, which is close to the home, right? And that's the lower education levels who are doing that primarily in rural areas. And then you have the third biggest category for women, which is beauty services and domestic help, etc. It's for the urban poor. Now, having said all of this, what is the role of government? Right? You asked about policies. What is the role of government? Is government the only actor which has any role? Sure, it has an important role. Yes, it should be thinking about maternity policy, for example. The current maternity policy puts too much of an onus on the employer, and it does not, benefit the employer in any way to have to pay 6 months of maternity leave to a woman, but nothing for a man. Automatically places women at a disadvantage, right? So this is just one example of a policy that I'm giving. There are many other policies, laws, schemes. Say, for example, the advocacy right now is around an urban job guarantee program for women. That's something governments can consider. But of course, nobody is saying that yes, you must give it like Narega. But yes, can you try to see if you can hire more women in government jobs, especially in those jobs which are non-traditional, like construction workers or PWD workers, which are contractual and don't require you to actually change any rules. It's actually not going to cost you anything extra. In fact, it will probably save you money because women are paid less. So, there are a lot of things government can do, but I don't think it is government alone. There are other stakeholders also, like private sector, that have to pull up their weight.
That's an important addition that you have, and a point that you have come up with is that the private sector's intervention in this entire gender discourse. Why do you see that? Are what are the key actors that we see in the private sector that can just be important and critical for this change?
So I think the most important is employers, isn't it? Because if we look at how we spend our day, most of our life is determined by where we are working and what are our working conditions, regardless of whether it's an organized sector or unorganized sector or academics or freelancing or gig work or whatever type of work you may be doing, or if you are an entrepreneur, it matters what your working conditions are. And at the end of the day, the private sector, large corporates, of course, have a responsibility, but even MSMEs, they are not able to do a lot because it's very costly for them to make changes. And that's where the government comes in as a partner. That, yes, if, say, for example, the government comes up with a maternity fund and says, MSMEs don't have to pay, it's okay, they can contribute 10%, 20% to that maternity fund, and let the government contribute some amount and the employee contribute some amount, like the EPFO. That itself is something where government and private sector can work together. Then another is for large corporates, definitely they can also contribute to maternity funds of their suppliers, right? I mean, if you have a very large corporation and they have a 2% CSR requirement, this can be one of the ways in which they contribute to CSR by contributing to the maternity fund for their suppliers, who may be small businesses. So I think we have to find these kind of innovative solutions for private sector to really support women. And then apart from that, of course, having diversity targets, supporting women when they really need to, when they feel like they just cannot keep up with unpaid work and the work in the workplace is very important for an employer. I mean, at the end of the day, being human is key. And I think the other thing is also around creches and care infrastructure. More than half of the respondents that we have spoken to in our consultations, and we've done over 105 consultations with women's organizations in 13 states. And what we've heard from them is really that they are not getting any support from their employer for unpaid care work, particularly childcare. And also during COVID, another problem that was added to this was that a lot of relatives, especially elderly people, were getting sick, and then they did not have support for, a nurse or somebody to help in caring for them. So all of the care work came onto women, and I think that is really where private sector can come in, either with monetary support or with infrastructure facilities within the workplace.
Mitali, there has been, also there are conversations that surround this thing that okay, in politics you have women now making serious inroads into the political that was mostly dominated by men until hitherto quite few years back. And also there are people, especially women, who have just been breaking the glass ceiling and coming up with extraordinary skill set when it comes to, and even now that we have a president also that belongs to the women's class, and you have to just redefine this thing that okay, now at the political level there are some serious policy interventions, there is a discourse that's shaping up, but we still need social safety and social security nets, and where do you actually think that certain things can be considered when it comes to the safety of women at workplace? Isn't that an important part of this entire thing?
I think safety of women, sometimes, Mehraj, the way I look at it is a little bit different. Ki, what kind of society are we that we have to spend so much? Like, we are spending on it, right? We are spending on creating domestic violence shelters. We are spending on creating grievance redressal facilities so that a woman is not, if she's groped on a metro or a bus, she can complain. We are spending on having women police officers so that they can, there can be a situation where women can come and complain because a man is harassing her on the streets. Matlab, all I'm saying is if you think about it, we are spending a lot just because men refuse to behave themselves, right? I'm sorry, I'm talking to you as a man, but I mean, if you think about it, if men just simply did not do all of these actions, if they were not violent, if they were not perpetrating these acts, then we would be saving so much money as a society. It's actually unprofitable for men to misbehave. So, so at the end of the day, I think education, sensitization, early stage interventions within family counseling to sort of ensure that men are brought up with the right values is also important, because I don't understand how the crime against women has increased so much. And if you see the violent crimes against women, rape, murders, and it has increased a lot in the last few years because of the liberalization of our society, right? I mean, when this live-in, this girl, she was in a live-in relationship. Her body is cut into 35 pieces. My God, I mean, it's shocking, right? The reaction of the government is, why was she living in, despite the fact that her parents were not comfortable with it? There are a lot of girls in live-in relationships now. It's their choice. Instead of saying that no, we should be bringing up our men differently, or we should be policing differently and having a more community based police approach. I mean, why is the police something to be scared of? The police should be some people who we can talk to, especially as women. But it's not the case. So I do think that safety of women is a very serious issue. Intimate partner violence, domestic violence. We have the 25th of November is coming up, which is the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women. And street harassment is of course a big issue as well. But domestic violence has become so much worse during the pandemic that it was termed a shadow pandemic, because it was happening inside the house and no one comes to know about it. So I think at some level, we just have to say that this is just not okay as a society.
Financial empowerment and also the financial support, that's so key to the empowerment of the women in real sense, is, I guess, that's very important aspect of it. I mean, starting with that, I mean, at this very interesting crossroads of the history, there are certain things that are also being talked about India when it comes to this country. I mean, that's staying at the high table of the global geopolitics, making substantial contributions to global economy, climate change framework. And when it comes to security and other things at the global level, India is, claiming its position when it comes as a country that's as important at the global level as the other countries. But there are ratings that are being associated and given to India. I mean, there's a sword that's hanging on the global ratings itself, because there was recently a cross check of the entire rating system that was being done when it came global poverty index, when it came gender equality, and other things. Also, there is a long list of that. But apart from that, what do you think when it comes to financial empowerment of women? You have been working at the global level with institutions where you can see, where does India actually figure in the large league of nations?
So I think there are a couple of thoughts I have on this question. The first is around financial empowerment as a concept, right? We keep talking about the fact that, of course, India has amongst the lowest female labor force participation rates. So they are not, working for money. But that doesn't mean that a lot of Indian women don't have access to money, because as a society, we are a society which is more community driven, family driven, rather than individual driven, राइट सो घर में अगर पैसा आ रहा है कहीं से भी, it is the family income, it's not the income of just the man, right? Even if he's bringing it in. So I do think that analytical lens which comes from the West is something that we have to question. And definitely it is important for women to work. I am the biggest advocate of women's work and for women's financial independence and own earnings. But at the same time, we cannot think that that's a pill for women empowerment. In fact, there are studies which have shown that domestic violence actually increases when a woman is earning, especially if she is earning more than her husband, because ego, the male ego. So I think that we have to do a lot of work as a society to just question what we consider right and wrong, and where do we fall on that scale. There are countries that are going backwards. A lot of countries in the Middle East. I mean, we are seeing what's happening in Afghanistan and Iran as we speak. And we are also, and it's not just it's not just these countries. Look at the US. Women just lost their rights over their bodies in the US. They are not a person anymore. Just when you are considered, like, when you don't have the right to control your own body, you are no longer a person. So, and this is happening across Europe. Across Europe, there's a movement by evangelical groups to take away women's rights. So it's not one religion or the other, it's not one group or the other, but it's about social consciousness. And I think India that way is one of the biggest leaders globally in terms of liberal values, in terms of acceptance, in terms of accepting different cultures. And we have to hold on to that. We have to hold on to our liberal nature and say that we want to make sure that people in our country, all persons regardless of gender, have the right to control their destiny, control their lives, control their bodies, and we have to make sure that women are able to do that. Now, for this, financial independence is the first, but political power is also important. And you talked about the fact that India is seeing that more and more women are coming into politics, which is amazing. But we also need more and more women coming into grassroots politics, not only just as a president, but in the panchayats and the municipal corporations, so that they can grow to chief ministers. At this point, there is only one chief minister left standing who's a woman. And yes, she's a ferocious woman, but I mean, I spend a lot of time in Bengal. My husband is Bengali. So I can tell you that she's the most ferocious woman that is there, and I'm so proud of her. But at the same time, why don't we have more women chief ministers and candidates in other parties? You know, so I think it's very important for grassroots women leaders to be supported so that they have sufficient political power to defend women's rights. It's now because women's rights are under attack across the world, in the US, in Europe, in Middle East, in Japan, in so many countries. So we need that India to take that leadership.
And one more addition is that simultaneously, side by side, if you have a gender discourse that's coming up so in a wide limelight, that's actually contributing at national level in many different ways, in politics, in economy, and in society also. There are certain things at the institutional level that are required in order to supplement it. There are police reforms, there are judicial reforms, there are administrative reforms also, because we any which way have missed the industrial revolution. And obviously, if it has not happened, India needs it desperately, because uh, we have to battle at many fronts when it comes to us as a country. That having been said, you have worked on some African states and some other countries. What are your thoughts on uh, gender equality and gender issue in those countries when it comes to continent of Africa?
So I think in Africa it's a very different setup. And I was living in South Africa for a while, and then I've worked in both East and Southern African countries, a few of them, most notably South Africa and Kenya. And in fact, I worked in Somalia also. I didn't go there, but I worked on a project about Somalia. So it was very interesting. And, I'll give you an example. So, this project in Somalia was around agriculture that I was working on, and they were trying to strengthen the livelihood, value chains from agricultural production, especially production of chicken. So I found the whole project very interesting because women were the ones who were taking care of all of the chicken. And this is one of the only formal sector industries that was left in Somalia at the time. Now, of course, it's improved, but I'm talking about 2013, 14. So, I mean, I'm just saying that even at that time, even when the country is at war, and then there's, internal conflict going on, it was the women who were, taking charge and saying, we are probably not participating in this conflict. We are just taking care of our household and our families and our children with this agricultural activity. So in Africa, women are very strong. They are the leaders in many which ways, and just seeing them is very, very inspiring. And I was lucky enough to participate in a conference in Geneva in July, and I met a lot of African feminists and thought leaders. And they, like in India, we have an incremental approach. हम बोलेंगे अच्छा ठीक है, we want this, but even if you give us this much, we'll be happy for today, then we'll come and fight again tomorrow, right? In Africa, they are not. They will be like this, and you will do this. And they are so strong, inspiring. And of course, I think the other thing about the society there, which I noticed in South Africa, I'm not sure if it applies to other African countries, but I saw it in South Africa, is that a lot of women are living in a community style with their relatives and a lot of children. But I noticed that there was an absence of men from families and the fathers of these children. And I said, how does this work? They said they will not stay. They will just leave. It's almost given that the man is useless. So, they all only count on the female relatives and at max their brothers or fathers. But they don't count on husbands and boyfriends for any kind of emotional or financial support. It's like a given. I mean, I don't know what that means for a society. I find it very foreign as a concept, but it also shows how strong the women are. But if this is happening generation after generation, then also what kind of values and why is the value not changing is something that one needs to think about.